Fact number 2, Jesus Christ died. Fact number 4, the apostles preached that Jesus rose physically from the dead. And fact number 6, the resurrection is recorded in the Bible, and the Bible is the most historically accurate book in history.
Tonight, we've got butts. But Kyle Butt is going to be defending the resurrection of Jesus. And he's got 6 buts, or 6 reasons as to why the resurrection historically happened. So we're only going to be, expecting the best evidence that apologists have for us coming out of this asshole tonight. And hopefully Kyle Butt will deliver, but I guess we'll just have to see. If you heathens want to fuck around and find out what Kyle Butt is going to defend the resurrection of Jesus with, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight we got Kyle Butt. Kyle Butt's got a lot of shit to say, so we're going to try to power through this as quick as we can because we've got dinner coming. And if anybody knows how fat I am, that's very important to me. All right, Kyle Butt. No, we don't have 3 cheeseburgers tonight. I just got a very light meal of boneless wings because that's healthy as shit for me.
Jesus Christ claimed to be God in the flesh. And one of the pieces of evidence that he used to bolster that claim was the resurrection. He claimed that he was going to die, and then after he died, the Bible writers claimed that he rose from the grave. The fact of the matter is Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Did Jesus really rise from the grave? Is there evidence that proves that to be a historical reality?
These are both really good questions, and it's pretty simple to both of them. No. Jester, Lord of Fools, says, before we start, can we please affirm that Paul was not an apostle? Well, so it depends on what you mean by apostle there, Jester, because as far as Paul is concerned, what it means to be an apostle is that he got visions or hallucinations of the risen Jesus. And I mean, there's no reason for anybody to say, oh, he didn't have a vision of Jesus. As far as it being a hallucinatory experience, I think that, he quite possibly could have had a hallucinatory experience. So, if that's your understanding of apostle, which is also the understanding of Paul, then Paul was an apostle. What Paul wasn't was a disciple. Apostle and disciple are 2 very different things. A disciple is somebody that walked, talked, and learned directly from Jesus, like directly followed him while he was walking around on earth, while a apostle is somebody who had a hallucinatory vision about Jesus after he supposedly died. So if that's the case, then Paul was definitely an apostle. But there are some people out there that think that apostle and disciple are literally the same thing, but I don't think that you can really support that with any kind of actual historical evidence, like via Paul's letters or any other letters. So the first question that he asked is, did Jesus really rise from the grave? Well, all the evidence that we have suggests that probably didn't happen, considering that it hadn't happened before then, and it hasn't happened after that point, at least not in the fashion that Christians claim. As far as coming back to life after your heart stopping or anything like that, the way in which Jesus supposedly rose from the grave is vastly different. So that's never known to happen. So that while it could be possible that happened, because we can't prove or disprove magic, right? Because that's one of those kind of unfalsifiable things. So there's literally no way to say definitely whether or not that exists. But what we can say is that we don't have any evidence for it, so therefore there's no reason for us to believe it. And then his second question is there evidence that proves that to be a historical reality? No, there's not. And that's why you answer the first question with no, because you should really ask this question first in order to answer the first question. There's no empirical or historical evidence that would suggest that this is possible or probable, so therefore you probably shouldn't believe it.
Yes, there is. I'm going to give you 6 facts that lead to the inevitable conclusion that Jesus Christ rose from the grave. Fact number 1, Jesus Christ lived.
Obviously, I have a lot of problems with this, so I can't wait for Kyle Butt to tell us why he thinks that Jesus Christ existed. Now, among his reasons that he's mentioned in the past, it has been the calendar. He's not going to mention that today, but he has in the past mentioned it, because why else would we center our understanding of the progression of time around Jesus's birth if he wasn't actually born? But the problem with that is that the calendar, the Gregorian calendar that we're using now, was made up by Pope Gregory. What was it? It was like the 13th or the 18th. I don't know which iteration of Gregory and the popes it was, but you get my point. It was a pope that developed it, and so obviously he's going to pick Jesus's birth because they thought that he was born. So that's been one piece of evidence that they use. Right now, the way that I understand it, as all the evidence that I've ever examined has not proven that Jesus resurrected. But if Kyle seems to have some kind of magical piece of evidence that definitely proves it, then I would want to know about it. So I think that it's possible for him to have evidence. Do I think it's plausible? Fuck no.
That seems very simple. It seems like maybe you shouldn't even put that in a list of facts that validate the resurrection, but many people argue against the very historical life of Jesus.
For good reason. If I could just lay this out really quick, the good reason is the lack of solid evidence that places Jesus in history. The earliest piece of evidence that we have is Paul in his letters, and he's got 7 authentic letters that we can really pull information from. And from what we can tell, Paul never references Jesus as being a real historical person on earth. Now, there are ambiguous verses, don't get me wrong, where under certain understandings, you could definitely swing a historical direction. But I feel like the mythicist arguments against those verses, being historical but rather being of a celestial Jesus, are far stronger. So I lean in the direction that Paul only ever attests to a celestial Jesus. And I have many videos here on this channel as well as on GE Shorts, which, if you guys don't know, we started a sort of a clips channel called Godless Engineer #Shorts. You can search that up and you can find it. But if you want shorter form content where I hyper specifically cover one particular thing, then you can definitely go over there, subscribe, and watch those videos. They post 5 times a week, just like we pretty much post over here. But so that's pretty much, that's a very generalized sort of argument against the whole historicity thing. There's very little evidence to suggest that Jesus actually walked on earth. He was more likely a celestial figure the entire time that later got historicized, which is how other gods got historicized in the past. So let's see what kind of argument he has for Jesus existing.
They say that Jesus wasn't a historical person, that he was a myth and was just made up in a story that didn't find a historical basis. But that's not true. We have several hostile witnesses that prove Jesus lived.
Name them. I'm just name them. All the quote-unquote hostile witnesses are either interpolated, forged, or they're too late to actually have any kind of independent source information. Hostile sources, I don't know what you fucking mean when you say hostile sources. Are you talking about Josephus? Because Josephus there's a growing number of scholars in the field that are showing that Josephus was actually completely interpolated, either the Testimonium or the James reference. The James reference is not maliciously interpolated, it's accidentally interpolated, while the Testimonium is definitely a Christian construction that was inserted into Josephus's work. So, if you're talking about those kind of hostile sources, you're not really going to have a good time.
We have friendly testimony from the Bible writers that prove Jesus lived.
No, I mean, the only independent friendly writer that you have is Paul. Like, the Gospels don't count as evidence, and we don't know what kind of sources informed the Gospels, so you can't use those as evidence because we don't have them. We don't know what they were. We don't know where they got their information from. There's no way for us to critically analyze them, so there's no way for us to know whether or not they had independent information about Jesus. So, if hostile witnesses and friendly testimonies are the two things that you think prove Jesus existed, you need to do a little bit more historical research and a little less apologetics.
It is a fact that Jesus Christ lived. Fact number 2, Jesus Christ died.
Okay, so before we get to fact number 2, fact number 1 has literally no bearing on the whole resurrection deal. Like, even if Jesus existed in the past, that does not mean that he resurrected from the dead. And that's the exact same thing I'm going to say for fact number 2. Even if Jesus existed and he died, let's even go as far as to say that the Romans crucified him for trying to lead a rebellion against the Roman Empire or some dumb shit. Just because he died does not mean he resurrected. And so I don't know why either of these two would be on the list of things that prove the resurrection when they could both be true, even though we don't have any evidence for either of them being true, but they could both be true. And Jesus still could not or did not resurrect, which is as true a fact as we can understand it.
Once you show that Jesus was a historical person, then coming to the conclusion that Jesus Christ died, even the skeptic has to agree, would be true. Because if Jesus lived, then he certainly died. And as you look at the writings that document the life of Jesus, you see that everybody in the discussion, the Jewish community, the early Christians, they all admit that Jesus did die. In fact, early Jewish writings that are not friendly to Jesus at all document that Jesus was killed.
Oh, so we have early Jewish writings about Jesus being killed? Like, what are you talking about here there, Kyle Butt? What Jewish writings could he be talking about? I know of none, unless you're counting Paul as a Jew instead of a Christian. Other than that, you don't have any early Jewish writings. I've literally never heard of any Jewish writings, so this would be new information that he should probably publish in some kind of scholarly article that's peer-reviewed, and I'm sure that he would win some kind of award for it. I mean, apologists love this kind of shit.
And so you've got the fact that Jesus lived. You've got the fact that Jesus died.
No, you didn't prove anything. You just made random generalized claims about evidence that we actually don't have. Just saying that Jesus died is not a real fair assessment of the claim of Jesus dying, as far as it getting us to a resurrection. Because when he says Jesus died, what he means is not just that, he died in battle, or, he died of natural causes, or he stubbed his toe and he died from, a staph infection or something. Like, what he specifically means is that he died on a Roman cross. He was crucified by Pilate at the behest of the Sanhedrin. Like, it's a very specific death that he's claiming here. And all he did was give us generalized statements about stuff that doesn't exist, like early Jewish testimony and shit like that. So I totally reject the whole dying part. Like, if he lived, then yeah, he probably died, but it's more about proving the way in which he died, not just simply that he died. Can you imagine the gospel of Jesus if he stubbed his toe and got an infection and died from his foot? Like, I mean, is that worse or better than dying from dysentery on the Oregon Trail? I don't know. Can you imagine that as a card for the Oregon Trail game? It's like, stubbed your toe, you're dead. Like, a snake bite, I can understand. But Like stubbing your toe or dysentery, I can understand, but like stub your toe and you die? Like, what the fuck is that? But anyways, I digress. So number 3, the tomb of Jesus was empty. I get a lot of apologists make this particular claim that the tomb had to be empty. But as you'll hear from people like Bart Ehrman or Apologia or anybody else, if Jesus was crucified by the Romans, then he was most likely thrown into a mass grave, right? They wouldn't have shown him any kind of respect or deference or anything like that, or reverence rather, because I mean, he was just another Jew that they crucified. And, they were doing that a lot at the time. And plus, Pilate, he didn't really fucking care. I mean, he had his soldiers slaughter a whole bunch of Jews at one time. To say that the tomb was empty means that that Jesus was buried in a tomb. Not even Paul says that Jesus was buried in a tomb. There's literally no information about where Jesus was buried if he in fact died.
Fact number 3, the tomb of Jesus was empty. So Jesus lived, Jesus died, and he was buried, but that tomb, what happened there? Is it a fact of history that that tomb was empty? The Bible writers say that the tomb was empty, but that's not the only testimony to the empty tomb.
Oh, is it not? Because as far as I understand it, that is the only evidence you have for an empty tomb or for a tomb to begin with. Paul just says that Jesus was buried. Where was he buried? I have no idea. I think most likely, in my own mythicist view of things, I think that Paul considered Jesus to have been buried in the heavens. And this wouldn't be all that weird for a Jew to believe, considering that it's called Revelation of Moses, but also could be understood as the life of Adam and Eve. Both of those are Jewish texts that kind of illuminate Jewish theology around this time. And they actually place Adam's body being buried in the third heaven, which is also where Eden is. So Eden was never like a physical place on the earth as the Jews understood it. They understood the Eden to exist in the third heaven, which multiple levels of heaven is a very common thing in Jewish theology. That's what I personally believe that Paul thought, but you could also make even if you don't want to go the mythicist route, you could say that Paul just said he was buried. That could be like a mass grave kind of situation where he was buried. It doesn't say tomb, but let's see what kind of evidence he has.
In fact, there was a Jewish writing going around early after the resurrection of Jesus that was explaining the empty tomb.
Oh, no shit there, Kyle Butt. I mean, this is great evidence. Not long after the resurrection. Okay, so let's just assume that Jesus died in the early 30s. So that would place his resurrection in the early 30s if he actually did resurrect. Now, if we're talking about pretty quick after the resurrection, I would expect, something that dates to around the time of Paul, talking about stealing the body or anything like that, or the tomb being empty, rather.
And that writing said that a godless and lawless heresy had sprung up from Jesus, a Galilean, whom we crucified, this Jewish writing said, but his disciples stole him by night from the tomb where he was laid when unfastened from the cross, and now deceive men by asserting that he's risen from the dead and ascended to heaven.
Oh my goodness, an early Jewish writing that says all of this? This would be good evidence about at least people thinking that he was buried in a tomb and that his body wasn't there. If it's an early Jewish writing, is it early enough to be independent of everything else? Well, we just need to figure out where this came from. So let's see. So I did the legwork on this, just in case you guys are wondering. This comes from a dialogue with Trypho that was written by early church father Justin Martyr. He fabricated a dialogue with a Jew discussing Christianity in 155 to 160? This is shortly after the resurrection? This is 120 years at least after the supposed resurrection. Written by an early church father. And on top of all that, it's fucking fake. Ya bitch. He does this a couple times in this. He doesn't cite where he gets his information. And it's because if you actually looked up the information surrounding this, you would get Dialogue with Trypho written between 155 to 160, and it's a fabricated account of Justin Martyr having a conversation with Trypho the Jew. How much more dishonest can you be than to make up information like this? Because it's not made up that this exists. It does, but you make up that it's an early Jewish writing. You further lie by omission by about where it came from, who wrote it, and what the motivations would have been. You also lied by omission by not saying that this is completely fabricated, under the understanding that the Gospels were considered historical at this time. Holy shit, but like, why the fuck are you an apologist? You're the worst apologist.
Now, notice what that writing is doing. They're forced to admit the tomb is empty.
Because Justin Martyr wrote it and forced Trypho to admit it, dipshit.
That's what Peter was doing on the day of Pentecost when he stood in Jerusalem and he talked about the resurrected Christ. And basically he was challenging his listeners to go and look at the empty tomb. And what you will find is the tomb. And it's empty.
Nobody challenged that of anybody when the Gospels were being written. You can't give me some fabricated dialogue with a Jew and try to persuade me that that's what Jews were actually saying at the time. Especially, during the time that Paul was writing all of his shit. Like, fucking come on, dude.
Jesus lived. Jesus died. And the tomb where Jesus was buried was empty.
None of that is substantiated with evidence. We have no idea where the tomb would be. There's never been a good indication of any tomb that Jesus's body would have inhabited. Right now, there are a few venerated tomb locations, but there's no definitive location of this. So there's just no way for us to know if Jesus was even ever in tomb.
Fact number 4. The apostles preached that Jesus rose physically from the dead.
As far as we know from Paul believed that Jesus did have a flesh and blood body, but this was still a very spiritual and celestial body, even though it was corporeal. At this particular point in time, as far as like spirits and ghosts and everything like that, they didn't consider them to be non-corporeal. Right? It's not like ghosties running around Judea. Like the celestial beings of the Bible are very much corporeal beings. They're just like magical beings. Even if you look all throughout the Old Testament, you've got the Holy Spirit that does things. But whenever you hear about angels or other celestial beings and even God, you have very corporeal things that are walking around the area at the time. It's not really all that out there for them to consider Jesus to have a corporeal resurrection, but when they say physical resurrection, they mean like Jesus wasn't magically resurrected, that he somehow just physically came back from the dead or something like that, that he was very real and historically here on earth after his death. And we just don't have any evidence of that. We have evidence of a corporeal celestial being believed to be here, but we don't have any evidence of a real historical person. Now, as far as them thinking that it's somehow not a celestial figure of Jesus pops into existence and pops out of existence in multiple instances in the Gospels. You can't sit there and tell me that he physically resurrected and became just like any other human again, but then he fucking disappears like goddamn Batman, okay? It just doesn't happen.
Now, on the day of Pentecost, when Peter was preaching that first recorded gospel sermon in about AD 33, he insisted to that multitude of Jews that God had raised Jesus up from the grave.
Yeah, that's what he believed, but that doesn't mean that it's true. And also, we only have evidence of that from, I believe it's Acts is where that comes from. And Acts is historical fiction. Like there's literally no way to tell if Acts records anything that's really historical as far as like the main events go. I'm gonna have to press X for doubt on this one.
And God had loosed him from the pangs of death. He went so far as to quote an Old Testament psalm that talked about how God would not allow his Holy One to see corruption.
This just solidifies my point in that everything that we know about Jesus, about his passion, about his resurrection, and everything like that, it all stems from the Old Testament. That is the purpose of the New Testament, at least the Gospels, is to connect Jesus to the Old Testament. That's the entire point of those things.
Peter stated that Jesus Christ rose. And not only that Jesus Christ rose, but that it was a physical resurrection.
I mean, plenty of people have fever dreams now where they imagine, like, I don't know, fucking Elvis coming back to life and, you know, shaking their hand. That doesn't mean that Elvis actually came back to life there, cow butt.
He stated specifically that his flesh would not see corruption. Some people have said, well, the apostles didn't believe in a physical resurrection. They might have thought they had seen Jesus' ghost or his spirit or something along those lines, but they didn't really teach that it was physical.
So I wouldn't suggest going down this route if you're countering, you know, this particular apologetic of saying that, oh, he was a ghosty, because that's kind of being a little anachronistic, because you're importing your understanding of what a spirit or a ghost is into a time in which they viewed spirits and celestial beings in completely different ways. They understood celestial beings like angels, deities, and others, divine beings, as being very real, like existing in a very real place in the universe. And that place is in the heavens, which was a very physical place. It's the entire reason why they built the Tower of Babel. They were trying to get up to the heavens, right? They were trying to get to the firmament. So they believed that it was a very real place. They believed that the celestial beings that inhabited those particular levels of heaven were very physical and real, just like they considered hell to be a very real place. They referred to it as Sheol, and it was a very real place that you could go to if you wanted to, but nobody wanted to fucking go there. They wanted to go to the heavens. But in Jewish theology, the heavens were all inhabited by celestial beings and not inhabited by like humans that were on earth. That's why humans in the Jewish theology all just go to Sheol, and they don't go to heaven. They don't go to the multiple levels of heaven. They go to Sheol.
Oh, on the contrary, they certainly did teach that it was physical. In fact, that was the cornerstone of the preaching and teaching of the apostles. It was the singular criterion that was used to add a new apostle, that person had to have been with the other apostles and witnessed the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That was the primary criterion to become an apostle of the one that took Judas's place. So yes, the apostles preached that Jesus physically rose from the grave.
So yes, he goes out on a limb here, and he makes a claim that's actually not found in evidence. Specifically, that claim is that in order to be an apostle, you had to be there when Jesus resurrected. Now, in case you guys don't remember, when Jesus resurrected or was found to be resurrected, the only people that were actually around were the women that found the tomb. So if he wants to go this particular definition, then it's only the women that were ever apostles. And that just doesn't make sense because Paul was an apostle. In fact, Paul tells us exactly what it takes to be an apostle. And what it takes to be an apostle is to have a hallucinatory vision of Jesus. And that's it. It's not that he had to be there with all the other apostles to witness the resurrection of Jesus. That doesn't even make sense for Paul. Tell me this there, ass. Why is it that Paul witnessed the resurrection? He was there for Jesus resurrecting, and that's what made him an apostle later. But then after witnessing the resurrection, he went around persecuting the Christians. And it wasn't until he had his vision on the Damascus Road that he turned to Christ and started being an apostle. He wasn't convinced by the initial resurrection. He had to be convinced by a further hallucination. None of this makes sense whatsoever as far as the context of Paul being an apostle goes. So he's just inconsistent completely with all of his ideas in this.
Fact number 5. The apostles suffered and died because of their teachings on the resurrection.
This isn't true either. Again, I highly suggest Paulogia's work on this. He's done a lot of great research into like what can we know about the deaths of the apostles and how many apostles were most likely needed in order for Christianity to start up and be created. I believe Paul comes to just 2 apostles. That would be Peter and Paul. Those were obviously 2 apostles. James was also an apostle, James the pillar. But anyways, it only really needed Peter and Paul. Now, were Peter and Paul killed because they were preaching about the resurrection? No, they weren't. We don't have any kind of good information about why they were killed or even how Peter was killed. We do know that Paul ended up being killed, but it's not because they were preaching about Jesus or anything like that. And also, they weren't given a chance to repent of anything. This particular fact has no bearing whatsoever on the resurrection. Just like all of these points so far, there's been five points. None of them matter as far as the resurrection goes. It doesn't matter if the apostles actually did. Let's assume they all died because they were preaching about the resurrection. That doesn't prove that Jesus actually resurrected. It has no bearing on it whatsoever.
You can't get around that fact. The apostles went everywhere preaching the resurrection, and when they did, they ran into opposition on every level. With the Jewish community, with the Roman leadership, and not only was it just opposition, but the apostles suffered, they were tortured, and they died for preaching on the resurrection. In fact, all they would have had to do to keep that persecution from occurring was to have said something along the lines of, Jesus didn't really come back from the grave. We saw his spirit, or it was his personality that was still with us. But no, they preached a physical resurrection.
Yes, because that's how they understood celestial beings at the time. But that doesn't mean that their hallucinations or anything else they would have experienced was actually a resurrection. I did see in the chat somebody say that Paul is a fictional character. There's no real good reason to think that. Just putting that out there. As far as we know, there's one author that penned 7 of Paul's epistles, and he names himself Paul. So regardless of whether or not his actual name was Paul or Saul or whatever in the fuck he wants to call himself, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the one person that wrote all 7 of Paul's authentic epistles identifies himself as Paul. He was not a fictional character in that the author didn't exist.
And they died for preaching that physical resurrection of Christ. As one Bible scholar stated, he said, while men may die out of religious deception, they do not willingly go to their deaths knowing they are perpetrating a hoax.
I completely disagree with this. There's no way that you can make this kind of judgment about the apostles and their reasons for committing as hard as they did to their belief. I think that they sincerely believed that Jesus resurrected. But I also think that they sincerely believed, like Paul and Peter, that the only apostles that we really know about, I feel like they sincerely believed in Jesus' resurrection. And it's because they had these hallucinatory visions and they read the scriptures. So they felt like they knew that this had happened. So even if they had been given a chance to repent, and even if they refused to repent and they died because of it, it doesn't matter because they wholly believed in this. Also, he's not indicating who said this. And it's actually an author that he later ascribes to a different quote, but it's like, I don't know, Walter Jackson or Ryan Jackson or something like that. He's going to say it here in a second. But the only reference that I could find to this particular quote is in a book Kyle Butt wrote himself. How many times do you have to shoot yourself in the fucking ass? Right? I mean, it's amazing to me.
What he simply meant by that was the apostles saw Jesus' resurrected body. They preached Jesus' resurrection in the flesh, and they died for that preaching. Do you know why? Because they understood they would get a resurrected body like their Lord had received.
And how in the fuck does this prove that Jesus actually resurrected? The only thing that I heard out of that was that these people believed this thing and they were fully convinced in that thing. And so they died being fully convinced of that thing. That doesn't mean that that thing actually happened in reality or happened in history. Fuck you, bitch. Sorry. I got a little carried away there. This is my bad.
In fact, number 6, the resurrection is recorded in the Bible, and the Bible is the most historically accurate book in history.
Oh, I don't have enough whiskey for this. What the fuck? The Bible, the most accurate book in history? What? The Bible can't even get the persona of Pilate right. Like, the Bible talks about Pilate as if he's this broken down ruler of Judea, and the Sanhedrin push him around to kill a Jew that he doesn't want to kill. That's not accurate to history. Matthew and Luke have two totally different origin stories for Jesus. There are so many historically inaccurate things in the Gospels and the Bible in general, like Acts being total historical fiction, that you cannot discern truth from fiction in it. You fucking can't. Like, I have no fucking clue as to why he would say this. It's just so demonstrably false. It hurts. Ow.
While some people don't want to recognize this fact, it is, make no mistake, a fact.
It is. Make no motherfucking mistake. I mean, if you forego any kind of critical history done on it, then yeah, I guess it's decent.
Biblical scholar Wayne Jackson noted, in the book of Acts, Luke mentions 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 Mediterranean islands. He also mentions 95 persons, 62 of which are not named elsewhere in the New Testament, and his references, where checkable, are always correct. This is truly remarkable in view of the fact that the political and territorial situation of his day was in a state of almost constant change.
So, like, let's start at the beginning here. He thinks it's a good argument to say, Luke mentions a bunch of places that were actually real. And he also invents 95 or 62 people that are not named elsewhere in history whatsoever. So, you know, he's right on the fucking nose. Also, you know how he doesn't really go into any kind of source discussion or naming sources or anything like that? Well, you know, where checkable, he is right on the money with the sources. Luke does not cite sources. The only sources that are ever cited are scriptures. So if you want to say that Luke's gospel matches up with the Old Testament, I'm right there with you. That's the only source that's ever cited. So yeah, Luke's gospel matches with the scriptures, but with other actual historical information? No. Luke does not record anything historical other than cities that existed that he could have just simply known about by at least being somewhat familiar with the area, and then inventing 62 people. He invents 62 people and then copies the other, 33? Yeah, 33? I can do math. How is this trustworthy? It's just amazing to me. How much bullshit they're willing to spin and what depths they have to go to in order to pump up their arguments. It's like, well, you know, Marvel mentions New York City and that's where Spider-Man lives at, so we know the Punisher's real.
You see, the Bible has been scrutinized and criticized more than any other book in the world, and yet it still stands as the most historically accurate book in the world.
By who? I mean, seriously, by who? Who considers it the most are the people that are scrutinizing the Bible, are they the ones that think that it's historically accurate? Because that's what your sentence right here kind of makes it out to sound like, but it's actually not. The people that are actually scrutinizing the Bible, being critical of it, come away thinking that it's just bullshit. It doesn't match history whatsoever. The point of Acts being near historical fiction, near completely historical fiction, is to say that there's no method to determine historical fact from historical fiction. And if you're at that point where you look at a particular event that Acts tells you about, and there's literally no way to determine whether or not it's fiction or real, then you can't use it as historical evidence. As far as the things that we can actually check against other writings at the time, we definitely know a lot of things were fictionalized, like the shipwrecks that happened for Paul. Those were fictionalized. Those were copied off of Homer's works, the Iliad and Odyssey. And then you've got several different mentions of failed messiahs and whatnot that are directly related to Josephus's work. So we know that that's one of the particular ways that we know that Luke was copying Josephus. And so you have all these things that Luke just completely changes around and copies from other people that we just cannot determine whether or not it's any particular event is fiction or reality. And at that point, it's unusable. If you can't determine that, then it's unusable. Could it possibly be a mixture of truth and fiction? Sure, possibly, but there's no way to tell.
And that historically accurate book, the Bible, those 27 books of the New Testament, they testify to the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ.
So the fuck what? I mean, Harry Potter resurrected, but you don't see me praying at the altar of Harry Potter.
So based on the historical grounds, the resurrection of Jesus Christ has as much or more evidence to validate its credibility than any other event in human history.
Well, so in order for him to make this particular claim, he has to assume that the Gospels are historical, Acts is historical, and that just pretty much the New Testament in general, the entire Bible, as he is making his point here, is a historically reliable group of documents. You just can't say that at all. So, I mean, he's just wrong. It's painfully obvious that he's only getting his information from the conservative New Testament scholars out there that work at universities that require statements of faith and all this other kind of stuff, that only work to reaffirm the faith. And that's all Kyle Butt is doing in this entire video.
The primary argument against the resurrection by those who don't believe it is that during the normal course of events, dead people don't rise from the grave.
I mean, yeah, dead people don't rise. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. I mean, considering that we can't 100% prove that magic doesn't exist, obviously magic, could bring Jesus back from the dead. And by magic, I'm derogatorily referring to whatever in the fuck God supposedly does when he speaks incantations and shit. True, we can't prove 100% that it didn't happen, but also I don't think that we'll ever be able to prove that it did, especially given the evidence that we have. So I don't see any reason to believe that it did happen.
Which is exactly the very point being made by the apostles. When all the evidence is weighed and it's revealed that the apostles never buckled under torture, the New Testament never crumbles under scrutiny, and the secular historical witnesses refuse to be drowned in a sea of criticism.
I just have to laugh at I feel like that clip from that last Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, when Luke Skywalker in Last Jedi just says,
"Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong."
That so applies right here to this, because everything that he just said is completely wrong. it's kind of crazy how he has to build his case for the resurrection off of lies, falsehoods, and just outright fabricated information. That doesn't bode well for your hypothesis.
Then it's evident that the resurrection of Jesus Christ demands its rightful place in the annals of human history.
Oh, it definitely deserves to be in the annals, written right on the ass cheeks of history. I can tell you right now, that's exactly where all this shit needs to be.
As the most important event this world has ever seen. To quote the immortal words of the Holy Spirit as spoken through the Apostle Paul to King Agrippa.
So literally not the Holy Spirit. It was just Paul saying shit. And if he's talking to King Agrippa, then this is Acts, which means that Paul didn't say shit. This is not something that Paul... How are you going to end this entire fucked up video full of lies with a lie? It should be expected. You're right, honey. But I mean, it flabbergasts me every single fucking time. It's like, I'm going to end this bullshit video with yet again another lie. I have come to you again with another lie.
In the great long ago, why is it judged incredible with you if God does raise the dead?
Why can't he actually quote the thing that fucking Paul said? Like, all right, so Acts, this probably never actually got said. There's no way for Luke to have known if Paul said any of this, because Luke was, several years removed from Paul. There's no way that he could know this was said. For one. For two, he's literally got it written right up on the screen, and yet he cannot read it verbatim. Like, what the fuck? You stupid ass. Thank you, honey. Developed and presented by Kyle Butt. So Kyle developed the script, knew what Acts, whatever the fuck said, and he literally chose to paraphrase it instead of read it literally. Oh my God. This is the most inept resurrection defense that I have ever reviewed. Oh, it hurt. I'm going to need more whiskey after this. Another whiskey and Coke is in my future for tonight. Oh yes, and dinner. I gotta hurry up and get to dinner. So that's gonna be it for tonight. As far as this video tonight, I always like to give kind of a summary. As far as this video tonight, none of the 6 reasons actually substantiated the claim that Jesus resurrected from the dead. They either didn't matter or Kyle Butt had to fabricate information about history in order to support the conclusion that it proves that Jesus resurrected. And I feel like at that point you've just lost. Like, you just shouldn't have made the video, bud. Is what my advice would be to Kyle Butt. So it was just a completely inept video, and I'm surprised that the Kyle Butt's channel, World Vision Bible School, YouTube something or another, is popular in any kind of way. It was really weird. There were no comments on the video, but it was posted a year ago. Anyways, we're going to be going into Skeptic Mafia comments now. If you will, please leave us a comment on this video and smash that like button if you liked the live stream tonight. And don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!